What's up YouTube, it's GhostRider15 here with my new channel. I'm going to be doing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh content with this channel. A lot of Edison format, a lot of Go format, and sometimes current format. Today's video is going to be my Edison format tier list, so let's get started. So the first deck we have on the list is Bayou Turbo. Bayou Turbo is a really good deck. It mills value so easily. You can get it to the graveyard with Raiko, with Charge of the Light Brigade, with Greffer, Armageddon Knight, Card Trooper. There's just so many ways to do it, and it just gives you a lot of advantage. Easy +1s. Hamsters of also a +1. Combining that with Caius, you get to banish one card, then you get to pop a card with Raiko. So that's free advantage. The deck is really powerful. It's one of the few decks that can use Royal Oppression really well. I'm gonna definitely have to put this one in S tier. Alright, so the next one I have here is Christia Sworn. Christia Sworn is a really good deck. They have boss monsters like Archer Christia and Judgment Dragon, both really powerful cards. Christia doesn't let you special summon, JD just nukes the board. This deck is one of the good decks that actually can make use of the Royal Decree. And this is also one of the few decks that can play hand traps, like Herald of the Orange Light and Honest. The only downside of this deck is it's slightly inconsistent, but not enough to make it a bad deck. It's still a really strong deck. I would have to put this one in A tier. So the next deck I have on the list is the Dark Calling deck. The deck that plays Evil Hero Gaia Knight. Gaia Knight is not that good. Like, the effect is decent, but it's easy to stop. It doesn't stop trap cards from destroying it or anything like that, so you can just get around it real fast. You have to play bricks like Big Piece Golem. This deck doesn't really give you that much card advantage outside of Absolute Zero, which is the only bright side of the deck. I think it's like one of the few ways you can actually gain advantage. But besides that, I don't think this deck is that good, but it's not terrible either, so I would definitely put it in at least B tier. The next deck I have on the list is Diva Hero. Diva Hero I think is a really strong deck. It's one of the decks that can make level 8 synchros so easily. And besides that, you also have access to Absolute Zero. And the deck is really powerful. Like, there's so many ways you can OTK. It also plays cards like Return from a Different Dimension. And it also plays Dark Arm Dragon, which is another boss monster that's probably the most broken card in the format. So I think this deck is really good. It's slightly inconsistent at times because you can open cards like Double Malicious, and that might be kind of bad, but there are ways to fix that when you play cards like Plague Spreader Zombie by stacking your Malicious back on top. So this deck, I think it's really good. I wouldn't put it in S tier, but it looks like it should be in A tier. The next deck I have here is Fish OTK. There's not that many Fish players that I've seen around in Edison format, so it's kind of hard to put this on the tier list, but from what I've seen, the deck is okay. It's not terrible. Like, it does have cool plays that you can make with Colossal Fighter and Armory Arm to OTK your opponent. But with that being said, the deck hasn't really shown much results in terms of tournament success. So for that reason, I'm gonna have to put this in C tier. Alright, so next I have Gravekeepers. Gravekeepers is a deck that can lock down your opponent by using cards like Necro Valley and Gravekeepers, Royal Tribute. That's what it's called, Royal Tribute. That card can actually just destroy someone's whole hand, and it can be good at times, but the problem is that the deck doesn't have many powerful boss monsters in it, and it's kind of slow. The deck just crumbles at times. And Nobleman of Crossout starting to get more popular, so if they just cross out your spies, you're in trouble. And also this deck also hasn't really topped much, so I'm gonna have to put this deck in D tier. So next I have Gladiator Beast. Gladiator Beast is kind of a meme deck in this format. Apparently a lot of people think it's a meme deck. I don't think it's that bad. Like, I've played against it many times and it can get really explosive at times, like especially with Gazaras just popping 2 cards and tagging out for another pop with Bestiari or Murmillo. The deck can do a lot of crazy stuff. Like, it's not bad. I don't think it's great either though. Like, there are times when you just can't get over something like a Prime Material Dragon or a Stardust Dragon and the deck just can't do anything. So I think this deck is a little underexplored. Maybe there's ways to make it better. But as for now, I think it belongs in B tier. Next up we have Wella Dad. I think Wella Dad's a decent deck. It's not terrible, but it's not amazing either. You do have to play cards like Krebons, which I think is an okay card, but not great. But like, you do play the Telekinetic Power Well card, which just lets you special summon as many psychics as you have in your graveyard, which is a really powerful card actually. It's like a soul charge in this deck. It just opens up so many plays that you can make. But at the same time, this deck doesn't have that many tops. Maybe it's just lack of player representation, I'm not sure. But based on what I've seen, I think this deck is a B tier deck. Alright, next up on the list is the Amaryllis deck. I think this plant deck is actually pretty good. There are times when it can get really explosive. You can open up plays with Lone Fire going to Titanio, and now you have ways to protect your Amaryllis. And the burn damage adds up pretty quick. So you have to be very careful with how you play against this deck. That one volcanic card that they have in their graveyard that makes you take damage equal to the damage you did to your opponent, I think it's really powerful. The big downside of this deck is that it can brick, because you do play a lot of big boss monsters that are level 8. And Royal Oppression and cards like Fossil Dyna or Macrocosmos, they just absolutely destroy this deck. So it's pretty easy to beat this deck game 2 and 3. But with that being said, it's still really good. So I'm gonna have to put this in B tier. Alright, next up on the list we have the poster child of Edison format. We have Quick Draw Dandy Warrior. So Quick Draw originally was considered one of the best decks in this format because it was what won the original Shonen Jump Edison. And it does have some really powerful plays. Like, of course, Dandelion with Quick Draw Synchron is always a really good play. But in terms of today's standards for Edison format and how it's played now, I think this deck isn't as strong as it used to be. Like, if you look at tournaments, it hasn't really done much, and there's just other decks that are doing way better. I'm not sure exactly where I want to put this on the tier list, but I'm thinking around B tier is correct, because it's not terrible, but it's not broken, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Alright, next up on the list is Trap Dragons or Disaster Dragons. Um, I think this deck is okay. It plays Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon, which is one of the best cards in the format. And speaking of best cards in the format, it also plays Future Fusion, which is absolutely insane. Just lets you send all your dragons that you want in the graveyard right away. And if you open with that card, you're in a really, really good spot. And also, the deck has a lot of traps in it. And I think that's also really good if you're playing Red Eyes, because you can keep protecting Red Eyes from being destroyed. And it just gives you so much advantage. I would say this deck is a B tier deck. Next we have Synchro Cat. Synchro Cat was originally considered one of the best decks back in the day. But nowadays it's hardly ever played. And as someone who's used a deck before, I understand why. It's not as good when you only have one Rescue Cat. And if they're able to stop your Rescue Cat play, that really just shuts down everything you're trying to do. Like, you can't go into Arcanite Magician and do all your plays. Like, if they stop the cat, you're in a really bad spot. Also, there's a lot of ways that you can side for this deck and just completely shut down the engine. Like, Royal Oppression is absolutely broken against this deck. So I think this deck isn't terrible, but it's not great either. It's another B tier deck, I think. Next on the list is Dragon Turbo. Dragon Turbo is one of my favorite decks personally. I use it very often, and I think it's a really powerful deck. There's so many ways you can just win the game turn 1 by OTKing your opponent. Or if you don't win turn 1, you can win on the next turn just by setting up for the OTK. But what I will say is, yeah, it does have some consistency issues, even though I've been working on trying to minimize that as much as possible. But a lot of people say it's not a good deck because it breaks. But like, I don't think that's as true as everyone says. Like, I think that the deck is an A tier deck. I'm gonna put it in A tier. Next up, we have gadgets. I think gadgets are decent. Before I thought they were bad, but now that I think about it, they're actually not that bad. Every turn is a +1. Like, I know the gadgets are not actual like big boss monsters or anything like that, but if you're playing cards like Solidarity, it's basically like you're playing giant beaters every turn, and that give you a free +1. So it's like your opponent has to deal with a big beater every turn, and then on top of that, you have to waste resources like actual good cards, like trap cards like Deep Prison, Bottomless, just to get rid of these monsters they keep coming back every turn. And on top of that, this is one of the few decks that can actually make great use of Ultimate Offering. Ultimate Offering is a card that can actually create so many OTKs in this deck, especially because you can just normal summon a gadget, then add another one, and then you just keep normal summoning again and again until you can just OTK them. I think this deck is going to have more tops in the future. It doesn't have many now, but I see it as a deck that has potential to get more. So I think this deck is a B tier deck. Alright, next up on the list we have is Frogs. I think Frogs is a really, really strong deck. It's one of the best decks in the format. Every turn is a +1 thanks to your Monarchs. And there's a lot of dead cards in this against this deck game 1. cards like Heavy Storm, cards like Deep Prison, they really don't do much against this deck game one. So there's a lot of times this deck can just get free wins game one just because a lot of cards that are commonly played in the meta are just terrible against this deck. And for that reason, I think this deck is one of the best decks in the format. The only downside is that game 2 and 3, out of all the really strong decks, I think this is the easiest one to counter because it has the most weaknesses. Like you can side in cards like Masker Restrict, Fossil Dyna, Vanity's Fiend, cards like that. But despite that, I still think this is a really powerful deck that belongs in S tier. Alright, so next we have Hero Beat. I think Hero Beat is a very consistent deck. Like you have a million ways to search your monsters like Stratos or Alias. And off the top right away, you get a +1 with your Stratos. And a lot of your other cards are also +1s, like Gemini Spark, Hero Blast, Miracle Fusion. All of these cards are +1s, and it's so easy to gain card advantage in this deck. Another good thing about it is that there's not that many cards that you can side against it that are broken. Like, yeah, there are a couple options like Kinetic Soldier or siding in Prohibition to call Alias, but besides that, there's nothing like super devastating that this deck is afraid of. And we've seen this deck top multiple times. It keeps topping all the time. I don't think it's gonna stop anytime soon. So for that reason, I think this is an S tier deck. Alright, so next on this list we have Fairies. I think Fairies is a decent deck. It's not bad, but it's, I don't know about great. I think it's just okay. Like, yeah, they have Christia, but I think the recruiter monsters are just like whatever. They're not amazing, and they're pretty slow. I do like the Dimensional Alchemist that they have. It's really good to recycle cards like Honest. And the only bad thing is that it does miss timing with cards that are commonly played in the meta like Raiko. Another big downside of the deck is that it's pretty easy to side deck against. Like, Light Imprisoning Mirror is a problem for this deck. But with that being said, this deck did win Worlds recently. So, I mean, it can't be too bad, right? I'm gonna have to put this deck in A tier. Next up we have is the KFC deck that Cardpath plays. Plays the Ancient Gear Monsters. I think it's a pretty solid deck. But the main issue is that it bricks a lot because you do play a lot of big beaters. That sometimes don't do anything in your hand. Like, you can have a bunch of dead Kuras or Ancient Gear Gadgetrons in your hand. But when this deck is rolling, it's really hard to beat. Like, you gain so much advantage from Kuras popping your field spell and then bringing down Gadgetron. And Gadgetron's effect is actually really broken. Like, it stops a lot of cards. Stops Mirror Force, stops Deep Prison. So this deck, I think it's powerful, but it does lose to cards like Cyber Dragon in the side deck because of Chimeritic Fortress Dragon. And this deck has a couple of tops, not many, but it has some. I think this deck is a B tier deck. Next up, we have Light Sworns. I think Light Sworns are good. They have a lot of speed. They're able to mill through their deck really fast. And Judgment Dragon is easily one of the best cards in the format. Like, I don't know if there's anything better than being able to blow up the entire field and keeping a 3k beater on the field. Uh, its summoning condition isn't even hard to do. Like, it's so easy to get 4 monsters in the graveyard with Light Sworn names. The one downside of this deck is that if you draw cards like Wolf in your hand, it can be really bad. And also, this deck doesn't have room for back row, so you can't really be playing much defensive cards. So if your opponent is able to outpace you and just go in and start attacking, this deck doesn't have much defense going on for it. Originally, this deck was considered one of the most powerful decks in the format. But recently, especially this year, I haven't seen anyone really topping with this deck much. Like, I've seen Christia Sworn top, but not pure Light Sworn anymore. It's been so long since I've seen pure Light Sworn actually do anything. So I'm gonna put this in B tier. Next up, we have Flam Bells. I think Flam Bells are kind of bad. Like, they're not absolutely garbage, but the thing is that the deck isn't consistent. There's times where you open up cards like Rekindling and you have nothing in your graveyard to revive. But I will say that Flamvell Fire Dog is a really good card. Like, there are times where it's a 1-card Stardust Dragon or 1-card Colossal Fighter. And 1900 attack is nothing to laugh at. That's really powerful. But it is bad to draw the Flamvell Tuner, Flamvell Magician. It's by itself, it's not great, but when you do have another body on board, it can be pretty good. Other than that, I haven't really seen this deck top much. There's only been a few players that actually have done tops with this. So I'm gonna put this in C tier. Next up, we have X-Sabers. X-Sabers are a deck that can be really explosive at times, but then at other times it's just absolutely doing nothing. It can brick, and I think it's a deck that's a bit underexplored. Like, nobody really plays it, but when I see players playing it and when it goes off, it feels like there's nothing that can stop it. Like, you get so many special summons in one turn, it's just absolutely insane. Like, I don't see any other deck doing that. Like, getting like 10 to 15 special summons a turn. Being able to do that is just absolutely crazy. And their boss monster, Gotham's, I think he's super broken for what he does. Like, he's able to discard so many cards from your opponent's hand, and not many cards can do something like that in this format. That's something that's really powerful, and 3100 attack is really, really strong. Like, I don't know if there's any relevant card in the format that's actually bigger than that. But with that being said, they still haven't proven themselves. They haven't shown that they can top. So for now, I do have to put them in the C tier. Next up, we have Blackwings. I think Blackwings is probably the most powerful deck in this format. They have so many good cards like Black Whirlwind, Blizzard, Gale, Kalute. All their cards can go +1 easily. And the deck can turn any of their monsters into gadget monsters because Whirlwind just searches every turn. And I think the best thing about this deck is that there's not many good counters to it. Like, sure, you can side Consecrated Light or Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, but those cards don't kill the deck. There's a lot of ways around that. And this deck has proven itself multiple times. I think out of every deck, this deck probably has the most tops in the whole format. So this is definitely an S tier deck. So next up on the list we have Makonas. I think Makonas are pretty underrated in this format. Like, they do see play, but not as much as I think they should. Combining the hamster engine with this deck is super powerful. Like, the hamster engine just helps you mill into your fortresses, and then you activate Forces effect to revive Fortress from the graveyard. Being able to summon a 2500 beater that pops a card when it's destroyed, or sends a card from the hand to the graveyard when it's targeted, just with one single card, I think is absolutely broken. It has had some success recently. Like, there have been a couple tops here and there. And I think this deck is gonna keep topping more and more. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in the A tier. Next up on the list we have is Zombies. Zombies is absolutely powerful and one of the best decks in this format. Originally, nobody was playing this deck because everyone thought it was bad after the ban list happened. The ban list right before Edison format, that is. A lot of cards like Mizuki went to 1. A lot of other zombie cards like Goblin Zombie went to 2. And just a lot of cards that they play. Like, I think Burial from a Different Dimension went to 1 in that ban list. So everyone just gave up on the deck and stopped playing it. But recently, a lot of players started playing Zombie recently. And it's been doing well. It's been topping a lot of events. Goblin Zombie is still a very powerful card in this format. Combining this card with cards like Bryonic is just absolutely insane. And being able to special summon all your monsters with return with this deck just sets up so many OTKs. And now players are starting to play Ultimate Offering in this deck, and I see why. Like, combining Goblin Zombie with Ultimate Offering and Caius, it's just a really broken combo. And besides that, you can also extend into level 8 synchros and just finish off your opponent that way. I think this deck is going to keep topping and winning events. So I'm putting this one in the S tier. And the last deck I have on the list is Chainburn. This deck doesn't really do much in this format. Like, cards like Ojama Trio, they're not good here because of tuner monsters. You can just use the tokens as tuner fodder. Unlike in Gold format, it's not a good card. So this deck, I haven't seen it do anything. Like, not even a single top. Compared to in Gold format, where you see this deck topping pretty often, there's just not enough unfair cards in this format for this deck to thrive. So I think this deck is just really bad, so it belongs in the D tier. Alright, so there you have it. This is my tier list for Edison format as of right now. Keep in mind that this list might change later on in the future depending on how the meta develops. Let me know if you disagree or agree with my picks here. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. This is Ghost Rider 15 signing out.